Hello and welcome to this training video for teaching parishes and teaching sites in Andover Newton Theological School's Field Education program. We hope that this video helps your site to prepare for working with a field education student, a man or a woman who is pursuing ministry as his or her vocation.
What is field education? Field education is a required one-year course at Andover Newton that consists of 2 consecutive semesters at one setting.
God, our Creator, we give thanks for the ongoing miracle that brought forth life on this planet.
Nearly all of our students do field education, as it is required of all students pursuing a Master of Divinity degree and a Master's of Art in Religious Education. Some students choose to do 2 or 3 years of field education, and some denominations require a second year, but for the most part, students do the 1 year. How did field education evolve at Andover Newton? In the past, when students were mostly younger, mostly full-time, and mostly living on campus, which is quite different than the demographic today, many students had part-time jobs at nearby churches, which was called field work. They would go to the church usually on a Sunday and do something like, lead the youth group or teach Sunday school. They'd be given a small stipend and then would go back to the campus and really not think too much about it until the next weekend. Some of the professors on campus began to realize that this was a missed learning opportunity for students, and that with proper guidance and supervision, they might learn a great deal more. So they set up a program where students would have an opportunity to reflect on what they were doing at the church and be supervised at the church. Various churches became teaching parish sites and cooperated with the school's course that was given for the students. And that's where theological field education came from at Andover Newton.
Well, I have a story for you this morning, but I'm standing back here because I need both of my hands to do this.
Today, the field education program at Andover Newton has 3 purposes in mind as it organizes its work. Andover Newton's field education program provides transformative experiential education for students pursuing a life of ministry. And that mission is accomplished through 3 different objectives. First, we promise students that they'll obtain meaningful ministry experiences in settings that support learning. Second, we promise students opportunities to reflect theologically on their ministries, especially in ways that help them to become more formed spiritually and more clear in terms of their sense of calling and vocation. And finally, we promise students opportunities to integrate their classroom learning with their learning in ministry experience through field education. In Andover Newton teaching parishes and sites, we expect that students will be given the opportunity to do everything that a minister has the chance to do. If it's a parish setting, we hope the student has a chance to preach, to visit those who are sick and shut in, to teach, and to engage in different kinds of ministry program development.
And I think for the content, they've sometimes used, a Dr. Seuss book or music or mime, and it's a really fun day because the young kids stay in the service the entire time.
Oh, good.
And the youth really run the entire service, from selecting the music.
Okay, I've never done. I talked to my dad about it, and apparently, from the real clown ministry, but I don't expect to be able to do some of the in-depth stuff with the youth because it takes, I guess, years to work to that point. So more just having a chance to experience the youth in the service and have them get the experience of leading in service, but doing it in a really fun way. Can you what?
Take this home and practice.
As long as you promise to bring it back tomorrow. Okay. All right, put your noses on. All right, here we go.
In an agency setting, we hope that the student has the opportunity to do anything that a director would have a chance to do. Leading programs, designing programs, and also implementing the programs. Of course, in a ministry setting, all of us in leadership roles have to do a combination of the public work and the administrative work to back that up. And we don't expect that students will be only in the public role, but we also expect that they'll do work behind the scenes. But our promise to our students is that they'll have a chance to experience that which ministry is all about, and have a chance also then to reflect on those opportunities. That's where theological reflection comes in, the reflection on the ministry experiences. Especially in working with their supervisors, students spend time every week reflecting on what's happening in their ministry in light of their faith. They might bring to bear on their experiences biblical wisdom, the histories of their traditions, different theological concepts that might shed light on what they're going through. And we, in our field ed program, encourage students to take time to think about what was difficult for them, what was hard, what didn't go well as moments that they felt God was very present to them. And as they reflect on those experiences, we know that they have a chance then to reinvest those experiences in their development, in their ministry as a whole. We also hope that they learn that theological reflection is a continuing learning device that they can carry into their ministries throughout their careers. Finally, we promise students opportunities to integrate their experiential education, working and ministering in their sites, with what they're going through in the classroom at Andover Newton.
The newsletter had come in the mail that day. Actually, the lead article is about the faith-based initiative, which we were talking about. So
we do this through a program called the Professor Practitioner Program, which brings ministry practitioners into the classroom, giving the students an intentional moment for really connecting that which they're learning in class with what they're learning in field education.
In order to realize the mission of the field education department, we have a number of partners working together to ensure the students' education. The first partner are the professors who teach the courses that complement and integrate what the student is doing on the site with what they're learning in their coursework on the Hill. The second partner is the field education staff. The staff meets with students during the intake process, during the placement process, helps the student realize their gifts and areas for growth in ministry, and works with students and sites during the years in case any interventions are requested for guidance in the setting. The third partner is the supervisor. The supervisor is usually the pastor of a church or the director of an agency and meets with the student 1 hour a week for theological reflection and for guidance on the tasks being performed.
Mm-hmm. I started praying, and as I got into it, she started to respond.
Did you
she started to smile.
An extemporaneous prayer, or did you use
it was just, dear God, thanks for being with us. And
she was responsive to that?
Yeah.
Oh,
she
nice.
started to smile a little bit. And kind of actually saw me at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think she saw me before that, really.
So she maybe made the church connection at that point. That not before, but when you were praying with her, then she kind of knew, because she was a very active member here when she was here.
Really?
So, the prayer life of the church would have been very much with her, even though she's not been able to come now for some years. She's been.
Right.
The supervisor is trained at Andover Newton or one of a nearby seminaries, and the supervisor at Andover Newton is required to do continuing education throughout the years that he or she is supervising. The final partner in the program is the teaching parish or teaching site committee.
Glad we could make our meeting today, and our agenda, as usual, is we'll have a check-in with Amelia about what's gone on since our last meeting, and then we'll talk about some upcoming events that you're working on, and then look at any issues that you have that we could help you with in the near term. So why don't you start with some updates for us of what's gone on since our last TPC meeting.
All right. Well, I wanted to talk to you guys about the experience of what it was like to wear a robe for the first time. I've never had to do that before, even growing up with my dad. I've never even tried his on.
What is a TPC? A TPC is a group of 4 to 6 lay people who agree to meet with a student once a month for approximately 2 hours. The TPC helps the student set appropriate goals and helps in the evaluations of the student, which are written twice a year. Most importantly, the TPC offers support and feedback to students throughout the year as they try to reach their learning goals. The theological basis for this is that we believe that the church is the church of all the people of God, and that all people, both lay and ordained, have the privilege and responsibility of training its leaders. Also, lay people bring a rich amount of experience from their own lives to this task. For instance, a teacher may have worked with student teachers in his professional life and is able to bring some of those experiences to bear on working with a student. Or A stay-at-home mom may know a great deal about early childhood development or about what engages a student in teaching, and that might help the student also. TPC members know how their church functions, and they know their church's history. They also know the culture of their church and what the members expect and hope for from each other and from the student. What does a TPC actually do? One of the first things a TPC can help with is updating or writing the site description that appears on the Andover Newton webpage. Once a site is approved as a field education setting, they write and post a description of their site which all prospective students look at as they're trying to decide which churches to contact for possible interviews. TPC members are very helpful in writing those descriptions, and they can also help take responsibility for updating them every year, as this information may change. Some of the important things on the site description include the kind of town the church is in, the size and demographics of the church, and whether the church will be meeting Andover Newton's expected stipend. So it is a very important document, and TPC members can offer a great deal in writing and updating that document. In the spring, it's helpful if TPC members help with the interviewing process for prospective students. We like to think of these more as conversations than interviews, because it's really a chance for the student and the site to get to see if there would be a good match between them and for a placement. Also, TPC members can offer students information about what opportunities there are for ministry at the church and give a student a sense of the people who are members of that congregation. It's also helpful for TPC members to see if they see a fit with the student and can give that information to whoever else is conducting the interviews, most likely the supervisor. In the fall, the main job of the TPC is to welcome the student and to introduce the student to each other and to members of the congregation. We know one teaching parish committee that assigns a TPC member to stand next to the student in coffee hour every Sunday for the first month, so the student will have some help figuring out just whose name is whose. Another committee in the fall sets up a commissioning service for the student, and they do it in an interesting way. First, they have the student stand up and they commission the student to be a student pastor or a student minister. Then the teaching parish committee stands and they are commissioned to be the teaching parish committee to work regularly with the student. And finally, the entire congregation stands and is commissioned to be a teaching parish, which brings together everyone in the congregation to help with the ministry of teaching the student. It's helpful, too, to orient the student to the town or city where the church is located, perhaps give the student a map or take them on a short tour. And finally, something as simple as giving a student a key to the church and showing them where they can hang their hat is a very welcome orientation for the student to the new setting. What happens in the first meeting with the student? At the first meeting with the student, an important document is written. It's called a covenant, and it is the statement of how the committee will be together and how they will be accountable to one another. Some of the things that might be included in a covenant are the time and place where meetings will be held. Some committees choose to meet in the homes of committee members. Some choose to meet at the church. Some choose to vary it from time to time. It is important that all of these meetings be held in a private place. For instance, a public restaurant would not be appropriate since confidential matters are discussed. Another thing that you might put in your covenant would be how to have respectful conversations and give feedback. One of the phrases that often appears in covenants to do with this area of being together is give the truth in love. When giving feedback to a student, it's usually helpful to first ask the student how the student thought it went in performing the task.
Selecting the music.
By listening to the student first and hearing his or her point of view, the committee is open to giving affirmation to what the student did accomplish, and then perhaps offering some feedback on areas for future growth. When and how the group will pray is also something that may be included in the covenant. Whether you will begin and end meetings with prayer, whether the student will give prayer, or whether other members of the committee will take on part of this task. A final thing that people may put in covenants are sharing faith journey. When students and committees covenant to do that, they take turns, one at the beginning of each meeting, to share their faith journey about what brought them to this committee at this time in their lives. This is very helpful for everyone. It gives committee members a chance to get to know each other in a way that maybe they didn't before, and it gives the student an opportunity to both hear and state their faith journeys. This is very helpful to someone who is preparing for professional ministry. Confidentiality is also discussed in the covenant.
One important dimension of the relationship between the student minister and the TPC is confidentiality. It's important for the student's learning that she or he feels safe and ready to be open to share any joys or concerns with members of the TPC. Therefore, our department sets forth standards of confidentiality that we hope help to lift up a safe and comfortable relationship between the student and the members of the committee. Our confidentiality standards rule of thumb is basically this: what gets shared in a certain context should stay in that context. If it's said here, it stays here. This is what we mean by that. If a student shares a concern about his or her work in the religious organization with the committee, we hope that that information stays within the context of the committee. It, of course, can be brought up again during the same meeting or in subsequent meetings, but it shouldn't be shared with anybody outside of that context. There are two exceptions to that standard of confidentiality of what gets said here stays here. Exception number one is sharing with permission. Students should feel like they can share information with you freely. But you should also feel like if the student gives you permission to share that information more broadly, you can. For example, if the student presents a concern in a committee meeting that a member of the committee would like to help the student with outside that context, of course that information can be shared as long as the student's given permission. In my own work with students, the standard that I use is that if a student shares something with me verbally, I get verbal permission before I share that information more broadly. If information is shared in writing, I try to get written permission before I share the information more broadly. There's a reason for this standard of confidentiality, as you might imagine. Not just a trusting relationship is established, but official documents get shared within field education. Learning agreements, mid-year progress reports, and final evaluations are considered to be part of students' academic record. That information can only be shared with permission, and so we try to adhere to the same standard in field education. The second exception to our confidentiality standard is that members of TPCs, supervisors, and really any members of congregations or agencies where students are serving should feel like they can communicate with me or with Kathy about concerns they have. From the very beginning of the academic year, we set forth to students and to every group we train that Kathy and I are part of the circle of confidentiality. You should feel like if you have any kind of concern, you can talk with us and know that you can share confidential information with us. We'll keep that information very safe and very confidential. Of course, we also know that sometimes you don't bring information to us because you want us to take action, but rather because you're seeking a conversation partner or someone with whom to reflect on the meaning of the issue that's arising in field education. We hope that you bring those issues to Kathy and me and feel like you can do so safely with everyone among the partners in field education understanding that we're part of that circle.
One of the first documents that a teaching parish committee is involved with is the learning agreement, which is written and handed into the school by early October. The learning agreement is the statement of the student's learning goals and the tasks that he or she will accomplish to reach those goals. As you can imagine, every learning agreement is unique as students bring different gifts, different experiences, and different desires to learn to the process. We encourage students to take risks, to try things that they don't feel maybe they're very good at yet, as this is about learning and not about proficiency in the very beginning. We do not expect a student to be proficient in everything they put in their learning agreement, such as preaching or teaching or visitation, but rather to encourage the student to think creatively about how he or she might approach learning those things. Part of creating a learning agreement is negotiation. While a student's learning is a very high priority, There is also room for the church to give its priorities to the student and try to reach some agreement on what might be included in the learning agreement. There is room for give and take in this process. Hopefully, some of these issues were discussed during the interview process, so there are no real surprises in the church's expectations or the students' expectations. The Teaching Parish Committee can be very helpful in this process as they are very aware of the opportunities for ministry that might be available to a student in the setting. For instance, if a student is very interested in working with the elderly, but it's a very young church, perhaps the student's interests might be switched to working with youth. That's something that might be explored with the Teaching Parish Committee as they work together to come up with a balanced program from which the student can learn. There are also contractual elements that are included in the learning agreement. For instance, the Andover Newton expected stipend will be listed on the document, as well as how and when that payment will be made to the student. Another thing is the 3-week vacation period that the student will have. We do not recommend 3 consecutive weeks, but any 3 weeks between the time field education begins, which is about mid-September, and ends, which is about mid-May. There's also a weekly schedule to help the student allocate time each week. The schedule usually includes about 5 hours of preparation time, which can be done anywhere, not necessarily at the site, 1 hour of supervision, time to meet with the Teaching Parish Committee, staff meetings, and then the tasks that are delineated in the learning agreement. As you can see, the learning agreement is a very comprehensive document, and it is created not only for clarity, but to protect everybody involved. The student, the supervisor, and the TPC have a good idea of expectations and responsibilities that the student will be undertaking throughout the year.
We'll now turn our attention for a few minutes to the evaluation processes that are part and parcel of the field education year. In January, students will participate in a mid-year progress report experience with your committee, with his or her supervisor, with your congregation or site. At the end of the year, students will participate in a final evaluation. Both processes are roughly similar to one another. At the mid-year, TPCs, supervisors, and students pull out their learning agreements, and they talk together about what the student has been doing vis-a-vis the learning agreement, what's working well, what the student could be doing better, and how the student is growing and learning through the experience of field education at the midpoint. At that time, TPCs, supervisors, and students each write a short reflection on what's going well, what could be going better, and what needs to improve vis-a-vis the learning agreement, which is the benchmark for all evaluation that happens in field education. All the different partners share those written reflections with each other. And once every party has read that evaluation, they sign off and submit the mid-year progress report. At the end of the year, usually in May, students, TPCs, and supervisors again pull out their learning agreements and talk about how the student has progressed throughout the year. At that point, again, each party writes a written reflection. At the end of the year, the reflection is a bit more robust, a bit more comprehensive, and really takes a look at the entire academic year of learning. Students and supervisors and TPCs again share their writing with each other, and when all have come to agreement that this document is true, they submit the document with signatures to the Field Education Program Office. Written evaluations are part of the way we help students to learn. In ministry, ministers very rarely receive helpful feedback that can give them insight into areas for potential growth. We hope that these evaluation processes set a tone for students, not just to get feedback in their field education year, but to solicit that feedback throughout their ministry, throughout their careers. We also know that written evaluation processes raise anxiety for everyone. Students worry that the written documents that will evaluate them will become part of their permanent record, and they're right to do so because those documents are placed in their Andover Newton files, the final evaluation becoming part of their academic record for their entire Master of Divinity or Master of Arts and Religious Education programs. For that reason, we know that with that anxiety comes a high level of responsibility. We hope that every time a written evaluation is part of the mix, part of the agenda for a meeting, we hope that special attention is given to having oral conversation about what's working and what could improve. We really do think that students hear affirmation and hear negative feedback much better than they feel when they see that information for the first time in writing. So we hope that conversations precede the written documents. Furthermore, we hope that with every constructive criticism that a TPC or supervisor offers a student, the student also receives affirmation for what they're doing well. Any good coach can tell you that all learners need a balance of positive feedback and constructive criticism in order that the constructive criticism is not too hard for them to bear. We hope that the evaluation process is candid, open, and honest, because we think that students learn best when they're hearing real and honest information from you. We also hope that it's kind and gentle, and as Kathy said earlier, speaking the truth in love. And we hope this not just because we are faith communities that seek to lift each other up, but also because our primary goal is not student performance, it's student learning. We believe that if you focus your evaluation on that learning process, on areas of improvement, on areas of growth, we really do feel like these evaluations will build up and lift up the student so that the student can function much better in ministry through that learning process. You might have noticed throughout this video that there's a method to our madness in field education at Andover Newton. We have a philosophy about how adults learn, and the philosophy looks something like this. We believe that adults learn best when first they take action and they experience something new. Second, they reflect on that action and ask themselves, what did that mean? How did that feel? What was it like? What would I do differently? What did I do well? Finally, the final step of the learning process is as students integrate that reflection into future practice. So, for example, a student might do something in field education for the very first time. Say, for example, they lead a prayer extemporaneously in worship, meaning they pray out loud without any notes, and they do it for the very first time. We encourage students to take those kinds of risks. We encourage them to do things that are totally new to them. And after they do so, such as praying out loud without a script, we encourage them to take time to reflect on what that felt like, what they might do differently if they had the chance to pray publicly that way again. And to think to themselves, what was going on there? Where was God in the midst of this? Where was my own voice? Where was Christ if they're Christian? Where are the principles if they're Unitarian Universalist? What we encourage them to do is take time to reflect on the meaning of their experience. And then we encourage them to integrate that experience into their future work, in this case, their future prayers. We talk a lot about how supervision, weekly theological reflection, is a reflective practice. But we also recognize that the work that TPCs do with students is reflective as well. For example, we know that some TPCs take time to choose reflective topics for their agendas every meeting. One week, they might decide that they'll talk together about what does it mean to have a calling. And specifically, is it only people who are professional ministers who are called, or do we all experience a sense of calling? And can we, in a TPC meeting, discuss the callings of every person who's come together for that discussion? They might take another month to talk about the topic of what is a church? Why does the church need to exist? What function does it play in our society and in our own lives? By reflecting together, students and TPCs all have the chance to lift up to the light their own experiences, and then to integrate those experiences in their actions as human beings, not just TPC members, not just student ministers, but as people who've come together pursuing some higher meaning in their lives, ideally together in community. So we hope that the reflection that takes place within TPC meetings is beneficial not just to the student, but to the members who've come together. But the primary focus is, as we've said many times, the student learning and the student's growth. We believe that reflection is an integral part of that growth and that learning. So we encourage you to engage in that reflection together.
The Teaching Parish Teaching Site Committee is crucial. It's a crucial partner in the Andover Newton Field Education Program. Through their collective wisdom and through their individual ministries to students, they offer support, good humor, feedback, richness, accountability, and a sense of humanity that contribute greatly to the experiential education of their student. They also lead their churches and agencies in becoming the teaching units that they are, that bring the student and the church together. We thank you very much for your involvement and your interest.